So the next developmental theorist we're going to talk about today is Lev Vygotsky. So Vygotsky viewed cognitive development as this outgrowth of social development through the child's interaction with others and with the environment. So he takes on more of a nurture bend than did Piaget. So Vygotsky thought that assisted learning via a more knowledgeable other takes place in children's zones of proximal development, where children can start to do new tasks that are within their capabilities, but that more knowledgeable other, such as a teacher or a peer, is crucial in assisting a child to grow within their zone of proximal development and learn those new skills. So according to Vygotsky, children internalize learning. They're able to develop self-regulation through the practice of these skills and through scaffolding and modeling by others. And he thinks that children are able to solve problems both through vocal or silent private speech. And then teachers in the classroom provide these interactional contexts for children to learn, like cooperative learning or scaffolding techniques. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails during this next slide. So again, Vygotsky thought that environment was crucial in the cognitive development of children. So they learn via experience, they learn via their cultural and historical contexts, and to be able to develop, Vygotsky thought that children needed to learn this sign symbol or symbols that cultures create to help people think, communicate, and solve problems. So for Vygotsky, he thought that learning involves the acquisition of these signs from the sign system through receiving information from others and being deliberately taught by others. He also thought that self-regulation became part of development because when deliberately taught these signs, children are then able to internalize them once learned so that they can begin to self-regulate or solve problems by themselves. And to move into self-regulation after being taught these signs, Vygotsky posited that children develop this private speech, so they incorporate what they have heard from others speaking to them and then use that same speech to help themselves solve problems. So an example of private speech would be when a student is doing a subtraction problem that requires regrouping. The child may say, okay, I'm going to borrow 110 from the tens group, and then I'm going to make sure that I show that the tens group is now one lower. And okay, now that I've gotten this answer, I'm going to go back and check it again. So it's just that thinking within a child's head that guides them, so that private speech guides them to be able to self-regulate and solve problems by themselves. Interestingly, research indicates that children who use private speech learn similar tasks more effectively than their peers who do not. So that self-regulation ability really serves children well. All right, so again, Vygotsky is famous for his idea of the zone of proximal development. So he says that there are three areas. Things that a learner cannot do, so it's way above their zone of proximal development. Things that the learner can do without any help, so that's below their zone of proximal development. And then right here is the sweet spot where he says that instruction and instructors should really focus. So this is the zone of proximal development. And these are the things that the learner can do, but that they need the guidance of a more knowledgeable other to be able to successfully complete. So what do you think? Is Vygotsky's theory continuous or discontinuous based on the information provided to you in the information that you read in your text. Some more terms from Vygotsky are mediation, scaffolding, and cooperative learning. So the assistant provided by those more knowledgeable others when a child is working inside their zone of proximal development is called scaffolding. So think of it kind of like the scaffolding of a building. The instructor puts those supports into place so that a child can be successful and achieve those goals that are just out of reach. But then, when that child develops those skills, the scaffolding is taken away by the instructor because then the child is able to do it by themselves and no longer needs the help. And that's just a continuous process, and you can kind of think of it like going up a set of stairs. As the child reaches the next step, the scaffolding is put back in place for a more complex task. Mediation occurs when the more knowledgeable other helps the child by explaining, modeling, or breaking down those complex skills, knowledge, or concepts. So mediation is really just the process of them helping the learner reach those difficult tasks that they're able to do but need help doing. And then Vygotsky's theory really lent to the idea of cooperative learning, which is something that you'll see in classrooms quite frequently today. So these cooperative learning strategies are where students will work together to help one another learn. So peer tutoring is a great example of cooperative learning. A student who has a better grasp on a concept may be paired with a student who is struggling, and that more knowledgeable student will help scaffold and will help mediate that less knowledgeable student within their zone of proximal development to help them build that skill. So some ways to implement Vygotsky's principles of the zone of proximal development and scaffolding in the classroom. So first, as a teacher, you want to assess prior knowledge. So you have to know what is within a child's zone of proximal development in order to best scaffold and support them. Then it's recommended that you build interest and engage the student. So really motivate the student to want to build that skill and learn that new task. And then it may be helpful to break the task into smaller subtasks that can then be used as stepping stones, kind of like the step metaphor we were talking about earlier, so that you can provide scaffolding for the first subtask, and then when the child meets it, take away those supports and provide new mediation or new scaffolding processes to help move the child up another step towards the main goal. And then throughout all of these tasks, modeling is a big component. So you as the teacher just showing the student the skill that you're trying to teach them can help them learn it. Another tip is to have high expectations of your students so you can help them grow beyond their zone of proximal development. In order to continue building skills, you have to So for your final check for understanding activity, you're going to create a scenario where a teacher is using Vygotsky's principles to facilitate student learning. So just incorporate what we've been talking about regarding Vygotsky or what you've read in the book into a scenario where a teacher is teaching students and facilitating their learning. And you can put this right underneath the other 4 questions that you've answered. So now that you've created your own scenario and have appropriately labeled which of Vygotsky's principles are being used to facilitate student learning, you can go ahead and minimize your Word document. By now, you should have 5 questions that you have answered. So 5 brief paragraphs on your Word document. After the video ends, you can feel free to save your Word document and then upload it into this week's Check for Understanding assignment folder. If you don't have 5 that you've answered, I'd recommend that you go back through the video and see which one you missed, because you should have 5 questions or 5 prompts that you've answered so far. Alright, moving on. So the last theorist we're going to talk about is Yuri Bronfenbrenner. So Bronfenbrenner was hardcore nurture. He created this bioecological model that describes how children's families, their schools, their community, and other cultural factors impact and shape a child's development. So if you have ever heard of Bronfenbrenner, you've probably also seen this graphic. So this really just illustrates the different factors that he thinks has impact on the child as a learner. So here in the middle is the child, and then directly outside the child is the child's microsystem. So this is what most directly impacts the child: their family, their school, their peers, their religious organizations. So all of these cultural contexts impacts how the child develops. And then outside of the microsystem is the mesosystem, and the exosystem. And the exosystem is more of those broad systems. So the extended family and neighbors, the school board, which has influence on the school, which then has an influence on the child. So these factors are more removed from the child and less immediate, but still do play a role in impacting the child's development. Then outside of the exosystem, Bronfenbrenner says that there is a macrosystem, so the overall attitudes or ideals of the culture in which the child is submerged. And then most broadly is the chronosystem. So these are different environmental changes that will occur throughout the child's lifespan. Now moving into how language and literacy develop throughout a child's lifespan. So there are individual differences for each child regarding the rates at which children will acquire language abilities. However, the sequence of these accomplishments is similar for all children. So all children go through these stages, even though there are individual differences within how readily a child passes through them. So first, oral language develops. So this just refers to speaking. So speaking requires not only learning words, but also learning the rules of word and sentence construction. So if you think back to children around the age of 2 or 3, they're learning how to put together sounds and create words that are meaningful. And then after that first speech is apparent, they move into making it grammatically correct and speaking in full sentences. So once oral language starts to occur, literacy starts to emerge, and this is called emergent literacy. So these are those skills and knowledge that is related to reading and is really the precursor to reading, but is not yet reading itself. So everything that goes into actually being able to read. And from emergent literacy, we move into the task of reading itself, which is arguably one of the most important of all of the developmental tasks of children in the early elementary grades, because it really sets children up to be able to learn for the rest of their school career, as reading is really the pinnacle upon which knowledge is imparted upon students, especially in later grades. And then after the skill of reading has been built up, children begin to write. So even within these stages, there are developmental sequences. So writing begins with scribbling and then builds up to writing a letter, which then builds up to linking those letters together to be able to form words, sentences, paragraphs, and so on. So within the elementary and secondary grades, these language and literacy skills develop rapidly for children. So astoundingly, researchers have estimated that the average student can add up to 3,000 words each year to his or her vocabulary. So, based on this developmental sequence of learning how to speak, learning how to read, learning how to write, in early elementary grades, the emphasis primarily is on how to decode and how to become fluent. So decoding is just looking at words and being able to break down the sounds that are associated with them and how they form into words, and being able to recognize sight words on a page and so on. Whereas fluency is being able to read rapidly and with expression appropriately. And fluency is the key, because once a student becomes fluent, they're no longer learning to read, but they are now reading to learn, which is really where we want all students to get to, so that they can start reading textbooks to start absorbing new knowledge. And explicit teaching of different strategies to help children learn language and literacy is really encouraged and has been shown by research to be most effective. So from second grade on, students may use strategies like predicting, reviewing, summarizing, generating their own questions, and what that begins working on is reading comprehension, which is the highest level of those language and literacy skills. So a few years ago, the National Reading Panel was developed. And the National Reading Panel was comprised of all of these experts on language and literacy who were tasked with reviewing all available research in order to figure out what the most effective way to teach children how to read is. So they reviewed all of this literature and found that the best way to teach children is to explicitly instruct them on 5 categories. So the first category that is really crucial, it's really the foundation to be able to read, is called phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the ability to recognize that there are different phonemes or sounds in words. So for example, the word cat. A child who has phonemic awareness would know that cat can be broken down into 3 sounds, k, a, and t. So being able to segment those, that is phonemic awareness. And then after phonemic awareness is built and mastered, the best way to teach reading is then to move into phonic knowledge, or the alphabetical principle. So this is letter-sound correspondence. So knowing that when seeing a letter A, that A makes an ah sound when reading. That is letter-word correspondence. Once phonemic awareness and phonic knowledge, or the alphabetical principle, are mastered, students can then begin reading fluently because they're able to break down sounds in words, they're able to correspond seeing the letter to the sound that it makes, and then they can begin recognizing words more accurately and rapidly. After that fluency is built and students are reading rapidly and with appropriate expression, instruction can then move into teaching students the meaning of words or vocabulary. And when those meanings are combined and students are able to read a large chunk of text and comprehend what the message was, that's when you move into working on comprehension skills. So the big 5 ideas in reading really build upon each other, starting with that phonemic awareness, moving to phonetic knowledge, and then becoming more able to read fluently. And once that fluency kicks in, students are able to learn vocabulary, and after vocabulary has been built, that is when comprehension is achieved. So just as a reminder, remember to finalize that Word document that you've been working on for your check for understanding. Make sure you have answered those 5 questions that were posed to you throughout the recorded lecture. You can save that Word document and submit it in the appropriate folder under the Assignments tab. And then, in addition, your first classroom observation reflection is due this Saturday at 11:59 p.m. So make sure you watch the 10 best teaching practices video. Write up your reflection on it. Make sure to include all of the criteria listed on the rubric for that assignment to earn full points. And once you've written the reflection, submit it to the appropriate folder in the assignment tab as well.